we change, can we change, and will we change? And I thought we could apply it to our discussion here. And I think, can we, will we change? We can actually have an open discussion on it, but really wanted to set the must we change part, at least in the context of emerging markets. I think, architecture being one can be, obviously very inspiring, and we know that it can be, a beautiful mix of art and science. But on the other hand, it can also be very tragic and ironic, and there's so much ignorance as well in buildings. Actually, we have so much biases, and all our kind of things reflect on it, and as to our desires as well, which may not really, this was a naturally ventilated project in Brazil, Sao Paulo, and you can see what's happened to it. Air conditioning sticking out, and in glass box, not exactly in a desert, but not in a great place either. I think the question is, this is an extreme example, but this is the kind of building that is being built in emerging markets broadly. This is kind of, mostly they don't even have the option of opening windows. That's the only difference, really. And then you've got, if ignorance was a problem, preconceived ideas are even bigger problem, I think, which actually, well-meaning bad delivery is even worse. Take this bus with the grass roof in Paris. It's such a bad idea, right, in terms of, what they should be doing, and it doesn't do much, but it just creates more drag onto the and it increases the weight of the whole bus. Therefore, what's the point of it? So preconceived ideas, are in my view, even worse, because architects then fool themselves that they're actually doing something when they could actually be doing something more meaningful somewhere else. And I'll give you some more examples later if you like, from some of my interactions as investor with projects. Actually, I'll give you one particular one, and this is in Cape Verde, off the coast of Senegal, it was a hotel project, and it was a Portuguese architect, really did a fantastic job of a project that would have worked really well in Lisbon. Double glazing, almost triple glazing with lots of insulation. But when you looked at what it needed, the temperature difference was not the issue. It was the humidity, it was the sun, right? So our preconceived ideas may not be as exaggerated as this, but instead that $500,000 could have been invested to do shading and other things, that could have worked better for that place. So that's kind of one more example. Now, I get this a lot, for example, India doesn't consume that much per person. It's still only 2 tons. Maybe it has grown very fast, but it's a huge population too. But air conditioning particularly is rising rapidly. And this is rising at about 20% a year, and in terms of growth rate. And if that really takes off, I mean, just to give you a sense, the cooling load of Mumbai alone is a quarter of that of US. Just one city. And if they really, need and deliver on the thermal comfort according to, Fanger's equation, then we'll never make it, right? And the kind of world we would have is something quite dramatic, actually. So today, buildings alone have more than US and India put together, right? I mean, total building consumption is all, 29%, depending on how you cut it. But, we talk about US being the big problem, but we don't really emphasize the fact that buildings, as if it was a country, it will be larger than. But I think the other dimension that is really missing is that there's a lot more buildings to come. India and places like that, Asia particularly, is not yet built. 70% of construction has not happened yet. They're still only 30-40% urbanized, and at very low building quality, mostly slums. All of that, if it ever becomes homes, that could be dramatically big. So all that Paris Agreement and actually, 1.5 debate is actually, going to be hijacked with this. Even if you get electric cars, this will not solve the problem. So, so that's something that has really made us aware deeply. And so when we say, must we change, this is not an option we've got, really. Now, coming back to, I'm just using India as a context again. Generally all across the world, vernacular architecture was generally very sensible, right? At least for those who could afford that. I would say that too, because most countries were so poor even then that it's only a few that had good quality vernacular architecture. And some of this stuff, the courtyards and cross ventilation and thick walls would have worked probably in most places, but it was mostly a rural idyllic. right? But when you start putting the densities you have in Asia today, people forget that actually Mumbai has more population per density, per kilometer than Hong Kong. So, but Hong Kong looks impressively dense, but the density in Asia may not appear that much because it's not high rise. But with that density and with that heat and dust, you can't really have the same ideas. This will not work there, is what I'm trying to say. So we need a new kind of vision for what architecture needs to be, right? In terms of I don't think we have cracked that part. I mean, we've just taken something and said, okay, let's get it, let's make it sterile the outside and just pump in air conditioning and that will work possibly, and that sort of is how they're dealing with it. But there's an opportunity to get the design right, for the new kind of age that these countries are living in. I don't think they have an imagination like that. Sort of, some of the passive design ideas really don't apply that easily or don't translate with the kind of density, the noise, the dust, the mosquitoes, and the rest of it. And this is kind of, the kind of buildings we build, mostly glass, and we get impressed with Dubai's and the Singapores and the rest of the world. But I don't want to make this into a guilt trip, but I think there is somewhere a professional responsibility. If a doctor, cannot blame the prescription, right? He has to take the responsibility for what we do as a professional. There is a certain kind of connection with and a very deep connection with our buildings. And I think that it's in our interest in understanding what is the right medicine for this place. And I think that is where I wanted to connect. So it's not the must-be change has to kind of apply. And I'm specifically talking about the architectural, engineering, building community. So quickly, can we change? So I joined IFC about 9 years ago, really kind of supporting the investment side. So my mandate was very particularly interested in that space, but also a little bit on the government support, writing building codes for some of the countries, learning from Dubai that Peter and I worked on years ago, and kind of applying it to Jakarta and Colombia and sort of to spread that. I wanted to share that experience of how some of that change has happened and thinking of, and also take you through that journey as to can this thing really happen, and how that has happened in this context. So we created, not sort of, it was an organic process, but we had this intention of a multi-pronged approach. We created a brand and a product called Edge, and I'll quickly show you that. But the idea was that we can have incentives coming in from the government. And it could be quite simple that we have, if you build green, you can have an extra floor, so that the exchequer doesn't have to lose any money. There is some cost to the urban context, obviously, but this is not exactly all single-story Paris, right? All the same story, same height kind of city. So, there could be some incentives that the government can bring, some mandate, also writing the codes. And also, and kind of the main angle was to kind of see how we can get developers mobilized, okay, through financing. And that's what Doug was talking about. That's continued to be our work. So, we pushed developers that we finance directly. We work also with banks to offer financial products. You might, it was a new world for me in terms of coming from the design and building community. But I don't, just kind of reaching out, it sort of had a lot more potential. So when we started off this years ago, we did almost nothing in green buildings. And for us, green buildings was kind of energy efficiency upgrade, and we would count that in Russia. But in the rest of Asia, that was not a conversation we had because they hadn't consumed it yet. So that was the irony. So how do you predict what they might consume in the future and kind of bring that forward? And today, we do $4 billion of business, and just last year we did $1.5 billion of financing directly. That's not including all the other kind of, mobilization we have done. We call it mobilization, where we get other banks to also do it because of our relationship. And we have teamed up with the UK government to kind of scale up more on the financing side through financial products. So that could be green mortgages like what you have in Germany, but Mexico has scaled up so amazingly, this green mortgage, that the largest bank that has 60% of all mortgages in Mexico, after 4 years of offering that product, said, forget the brown mortgage, we'll only do green. So they got rid of the green mortgage as a word. It became only that. And they have differentiating products, a bit like what KfW offers in Germany. Sort of, I think what we forget is that things can happen quite rapidly if it absolutely makes sense. Is all I wanted to communicate, that, you know, it's the can part of it. It seems impossible to mobilize finance, especially if you think architects and your clients are difficult, try banks. You know, they're a bit like insurance companies. They need to see proof, they need to see evidence before they can even move. So, you know, so that's kind of been the challenge. It's still a long way to go. You know, the opportunity in financing is about 16 trillion in buildings. I don't know if you know this, but it's the biggest one there is in emerging markets. You know, compared to say 6 for renewable energy. That's the kind of difference, just to give you a sense. So, you know, when you talk finance, this could be for a banker. Once they get in, it's a big market. You know, some places it works, like Jakarta. My director said, "No way, Jakarta, that's not going to happen." You know, it's not. But that place somehow it worked because we made it only about buildings that are large. So we said only buildings that are more than 8 stories have to apply. That made the rich apply it first, and that's sort of scaled up nicely. You know, it sort of made sense, because if you have a code applies to everyone, then there are always people at the bottom, you know, of the chart that can't apply. They don't have the government staff to apply. So I can talk a lot about it in terms of that. But financing generally has scaled up quite well. We have banks lining up. Just to give you an example, Colombia, we funded 2 banks there to offer this just through bonds, and within the space of 6 months, they have become, you know, they've got 2 million square meters through Edge. So sort of really, once it starts making sense, developers line up, banks offer incentives with, you know, sort of naturally in a way. So that's kind of where I think I wanted to kind of share, you know, we could possibly, I don't have the answer, but there are some places where it's worked, and I wanted to share that. And one of the key reasons it has worked is because we had a way to quantify numbers. And for banks, numbers matter. And we need to find what matters for architects, but for banks, numbers mattered. So we came up with a platform, and this is a simplified version of it. And essentially, you choose your type of building, and now we've added more. And Charles, we've added we are looking to add urban design and other aspects too. But essentially, you know, it's a simplified model, you know, and essentially you put in some basic parameters. It tells you what your the energy prediction would be for your base case. You were asking, what is your base case? This is the regulation. It tells you where your impacts are. You'd be surprised how little our clients know about this. You know, clients are completely out of the picture, and the idea was to bypass the design team and talk to the client directly, the developers, to get them to buy in. That's kind of how we managed to do this and scale this up. So, and you would kind of get them educated on, okay, actually having less glass is better. You know, and what I was surprised was architects were not letting the client know that having less glass is better, because they like their portfolio to be lovely and glassy, you know, because it's more photogenic, unfortunately. So, and actually, you know, less glass is less money, right? Capital cost savings. So this whole thing about green buildings costing more is only if your starting point is a fully glazed building. But actually, so this is kind of simple stuff that was completely missed, and that's kind of also what's inspired us to say, hold on, you know, why can't we just build sense? Why do we need a business case for this? You know, why this is the capital cost decrease. Why do you need a business case? So that's kind of some of the aspects here. I don't want to go into this very deep, but have a look at this and you'll get a better sense. And through this, you know, we managed to capture a whole bunch of, you know, we've got, you know, I don't remember the exact numbers, but lots and lots of projects with what exactly they've done, and a web page on clients, and trying to share that. And one of the things we want to do is create a marketplace where people can learn from each other as well. And this is kind of some of the numbers we've scaled up. We've also got Edge expert training for lots of people that want to know more about how to use the product and get that going. So, and 61,000 homes, that's kind of in the last 3 years. So there's a lot more to be done, but that's kind of a nice humbling feeling when you start seeing mostly affordable housing, because that's really where we operate in terms of where we do this. So what, you know, the brown to green has not happened, the shunting as they used to call it, right? You know, of moving the tracks. But I think the thinking from this product was, you know, the brown is moving in this direction. For buildings, we don't need new financing. We just need to divert it to go into the right direction with a few incentives, maybe to get them interested in this space. That's kind of how that sort of worked. The question is, can we do this with the design community? Is there a similar sort of, something that can fundamentally change the way we design and build buildings? So will we change, the last part? I think the question, and we had a discussion as well about form follows process, form follows systems, form follows environment. For those who are not architects, this might not make any sense. Long time ago, somebody said form follows function, and then we lost it all, actually. So the question is, how can we change that? How can we really make, and you say this well, Christine, it's sort of, this is not about the business case. This is about what is your, I think to quote you, I think you said, what are you comparing against? If the comparison is about killing the person in the building and ruining the planet, then then you have to measure the cost. But if it's about building sensibly, then why isn't not it just built in? How can we change? And it's not about change. It's about giving my sense is that it's not a gradual process. The person either sees it in one instant, that it is it's the truth, or they don't see it. It's not something you kind of brew slowly and they go that, because I think that the noise is already there. Everybody knows about green, and still nothing has happened. So we need something quite instant that makes it a bit like, the Fox, what do you call it? The animal rights thing, that impact that has, or the BBC program on plastics, David Attenborough talking about floating islands. I'm not saying that is the only thing, but there is a general kind of awareness. We need something quite dramatic that sort of transforms the architectural and the design community to kind of follow environment, or at least consider that as a part of the form. Essentially. One other thing, I noticed that across the board, we have one-off projects, and you call it lighthouses, but even within practices, they would have a portfolio deck, and there'd be one project that they would show the client, but the rest may not be so green. I feel like rather than kind of focus on zero carbon one project, which is 100% green, why can't we have a 20% across 100%? That's a lot bigger number than 100, I think, than this. So how can we get good practice? It's not, you can still have your spikes of, inspiration, but how can we make the general architectural practices or engineering practices standard a minimum requirement? We're not going to have this line crossed. Is one of the ways I would like to explore this. And we're trying to do this with so just to give you a sense, Radisson Hotels has said, no, we're not going to do anything that at least has gone through edge and doesn't meet the 20% standard. We have got Schwartz Group, the little stores, they have said they would do this. So if we can get hard-nosed commercial guys to follow this, how can we get practices to follow this too, who care deeply about their buildings, okay? Sorry if I'm, So I think this has got to be not so much, I feel this conversation should be less about the problems, because we know the challenges are hard, but it's about, the Star Trek kind of thing, where we know Darth Vader is waiting, but how can we create that resistance as a group and slowly build the resistance and change that fundamentally? Thank you.